Right, we're going back to what is always the day's top story at the moment. It is, of course, the Bibby Stockholm. This is the barge which is moored off the coast of Portland in Dorset, designed to house 500 people waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. Now, what is the latest on this? At present, there's still only about 15 people on board. Mixed reports of what it's like. One of them apparently describing it as Alcatraz, and someone else saying it's really great. Actually had some good grub and played some table football. Then we've learned, of course, that 20 have refused to board, being helped by Care for Calais, the charitable organisation, which I think instead of donating to them, you could probably just buy a hotel room and give a brown envelope full of cash to a lawyer, right? Because that's pretty much what you're paying for. But Care for Calais have prevented 20 people from going on board, one of which had severe fear of water. I mean, I don't really think you're that close to the water. This thing is the size of a small planet, and it's not exactly in the middle of the North Sea, is it? It's just like a floating hotel. But, you know, there you go. Yeah, we're going to be speaking now to Ivon Sampson, who is an immigration lawyer, to find out whether there's any credence to some of these claims or whether this is just some set-piece lines that these people have been told to use. Ivon, what are your thoughts on this? Is it really Alcatraz to put people on the Bibby Stockholm? Because Vince, who called me up just before the last advert break, was himself an asylum seeker from Uganda and said, it looks fine to me and people shouldn't bite the hand that feeds them. I'd be very grateful to have somewhere like that to stay.
Look, I really sympathise with your viewers because look, I've been on a prison ship when I was a young lawyer. This is many moons ago, and on a barge very similar to the Bibby Stockholm. And I do sympathise with your views because if you are seeking asylum and you're provided with accommodation and it meets the basic standards required under the Housing Act, there's no real reason why they should be refused. But remember that if they refuse it, and the Home Office can then withdraw or refuse to decide the application. Then what happens? The individual becomes destitute. Then what happens? Do they live on the streets? You see, the problem is we can't remove anybody. So if somebody's asylum application is withdrawn or the Home Office decide not to consider it because they refused asylum financial support and accommodation, then what happens next? We can't remove them. So it just shows a glaring failure in the government's policies to deal with those people who are refused asylum applications for whatever reason.
I mean, in all intents and purposes, it's not a prison ship because the people on board can come and go as they please, even have their transport subsidised and offered all sorts of activities as well to help them get involved with the local community, a few cricket games, festival tickets and so on and so forth. So why on earth is it then that Care for Calais seem to have stopped 20 people from going on board? If it does meet basic housing standards, to me it looks like essentially student accommodation on a boat, probably no better than the average student seems to get in an old halls of residence. So how is it that 20 of them have refused to board if ultimately they could end up destitute?
Well, there's two grounds. The first is that there's a duty of care that the government has to those asylum seekers. And if they have a genuine fear of water and causing them anxiety and stress, they need medical evidence of all that. And the other one is Article 8. There's a right to physical and moral integrity. So if it's not suitable of a certain standard, they can refuse that as well. But I have to say the government really should showcase this barge. Let the cameras in, let the media in, let's have a see what it looks like. I'm not sure why they're not doing that. But look, I think there may be political reasons why organisations like Care for Calais are doing this. I have no evidence, so that's my personal view. But there may be political reasons why some of these organisations are going after the government.
Yeah, no, I suspect you're probably right that they want to make it as difficult for the government as possible. But of course, this actually ends up wasting a lot of money. It puts money in the pockets of, well, lovely people like you, Ivon, in fact, but it puts money in the pockets of the legal system. We've already got backlogs in our courts and so on and so forth here, and legal aid straining under the weight of all the pressure. But that money would be better off used, surely, to pay for more Bibby barges. They're regularly used in Germany, for example, and to get rid of the 50,000 currently in hotels and put them in secure accommodation, you'd need 100 Bibby barges. Surely it's all counterproductive.
Oh, it is, and there's just not enough capacity we don't have enough barges to meet the demand for August, which will be in the region of about 20,000 people crossing this month. That is the estimate the government had looking at last year's figures. No, we just don't have the capacity. And this, again, is a problem the government has known about for over a year. They haven't resolved the core problem, is deciding applications within a reasonable time to free up the bottleneck. That is the problem. Once an asylum application is decided, that individual, once they're recognised as a refugee, can then go and work, find their own accommodation. But while they're in the system, we have a legal responsibility to provide them with care, accommodation, sustenance.
I mean,
and
on that, actually, one thing I want to ask you on that is, I mean, it's taking years and years to get asylum applications processed. Every single person who comes on this show, I say it whenever I go on other shows, is why on earth is this the main priority not being processing? We've heard every other policy under the sea, some fantastical, some you're just plain ludicrous, and yet we don't ever hear that we're going to double the number of the workforce working on those applications. But what I wanted to ask you specifically, Ivon, is how often, if these application processes were sped up and it was a case of, well, sorry, you've been in France for 2 years first, bam, you're not coming in, or you're from, you know, some sort of dreadful part of Syria that is back under ISIS control, of course you can stay. Is there not a risk that these application processes get drawn out anyway because people then appeal them and challenge them, and that is potentially a service you would be offering people?
Well, I don't actually. I don't take any legal aid money, just to correct.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't. No, I wasn't sort of accusing you of anything, but I'm glad you corrected me.
What I'm saying is that the grant rate for Syria, Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iraq is in the 90%. So I had an application approved today for one of my clients, a Syrian national. He could have had his decided over a year and a half ago. But it took a year and a half of faffing around, backwards and forwards with information. He was never interviewed. And that could have been done a year ago. And so once they've been decided, they can go and work. And this chap, he actually works for an international organization. And so he could go and work and earn a living and got his own accommodation.
Why do you think there is so much back and forth and faffery, so to speak? Is this about sort of security reasons? If you're coming from somewhere like Syria, of course, which huge swathes of it were controlled by ISIS, a pretty brutal and grim organisation, we certainly wouldn't want their operatives on British soil. Is that the main reason, or is this just bureaucratic nonsense?
Well, my experience of dealing with asylum applications and generally human rights claims is, and this is different from business applications. Business applications are decided within 5 days. The Home Office does it. And because, I mean, one of my clients just paid £30,000 for him and his family to come here on a skilled worker visa. And the Home Office are great at deciding those ones where you're getting paid. But asylum applications are free. Nobody's charging them for it. The Home Office doesn't charge anyone. And so they drag their heels. The resources should be going into asylum to get the right people to make the decision, and it's strategy decisions about granting those 5 countries where the grant rate is in the 90%, have a streamlined system. Let's get them decided, get them out of the system so we can free up the accommodation for other people coming in. And the government simply isn't doing that.
Now, when it comes to freeing up accommodation for other people coming in, if someone came to you and said, oh, I've got my letter saying that it's time for me to move out of the Marriott and go to the Bibby Barge and I don't want to do it, would you say, a la Lee Anderson, F off back to France?
No, I wouldn't. And it's an absolute disgrace, Lee Anderson's comment. And the worst thing is, he didn't even apologise. Skeptics amongst us would say that it was calculated, it was deliberate, sending a message out to those right-wing supporters they need to win the election. And he was unapologetic. I don't know if you saw the Farage show interview. When he asked him to apologise, he said one word, no. He said, it shows my frustration. Well, you don't have to be a right-wing, anti-asylum seeker politician to show your frustration. You can do that on the floor in the House of Commons and argue like everybody else. But instead, using that language for a government minister, well, deputy chairman, is a disgrace. he should be sacked as deputy chairman.
Ooh, a lot of people disagree with you there who are messaging in saying that essentially what Lee Anderson has said reflects their frustrations. Well, let's hear Robert's Jenrick talking to our Kev this morning on The Breakfast Show about just this.
Well, I think he does speak for the vast majority of the British public. We want the UK to be a generous country, but that generosity has limits. And if people say that they're destitute and want to rely on the British taxpayer to house them and support them, they should accept the accommodation that's an offer. And whether that be the Barge or the disused military sites we're bringing forwards, these will always be decent and legally compliant forms of accommodation, but they shouldn't be luxurious.
I mean, they know what they're doing, don't they, Ivon? Robert Jenrick is essentially the attack dog who says things that are going to make headlines like this, so the Tory government can essentially pretend that they're on our side doing something about it. They're as frustrated as we are. It's not them who are supposed to be sorting out this problem. It's everyone else but. And they'd all like to say a big F off to this situation. I mean, that's exactly what this is about, isn't it?
It is. And the vast majority of the British public are decent, law-abiding and polite individuals. They wouldn't use that language. It's the way he used it and the words he used was sending a clear message to those voters that they need to try and retain the seats that they won in the last election. And it's a disgrace using this language against vulnerable people. I mean, look, women who've been trafficked for prostitution by criminal gangs who come here, does Lee Anderson want her to F off? Or do we actually look after them and provide these individuals with protection? It's an absolute disgrace.
Lee Anderson did, of course, clarify that he wasn't saying that about someone who was a genuine asylum seeker, but those who are potentially gaming the system and find that whatever we're offering them isn't good enough. But, you know, I'm not a fan of swearing. I can't do it in my job right now. If I were to say F off, not, you know, the full words, I'd be in quite a lot of trouble. Ofcom would be at me in a second, as would my producer, he says in my ear. So don't do it, Alex. Be careful. Monitor your language for the sake of us all.